Howdy, my name is Dane Madrigal, and I'm a musician based out of the greater Los Angeles area. So today, when we're talking about Tchaikovsky's Guide to the Practical Study of Harmony, we're going to be talking about connection of the major triads. So just to let you all know, in case the description isn't something that you check quite often, there's timestamps there so you can check out anything that I'm about to talk about immediately as soon as you check out the timestamps. But anyway, just to get into it, so it'll hopefully be a shorter video, Tchaikovsky immediately talks about how the treatise is formulated once more, because eventually we're going to be getting into choral voicing, which is basically SATB, and that's the way that we're going to be formulating the harmony. But at the current time, he wants us to formulate the harmony in what's called a keyboard format, so it's closed voicings of chords. In those closed voicings of chords, you're going to have a bass that's taking up the bass stave, and then three voices in the treble stave that are going to be acting as your tenor, your alto, and your soprano. So he wants you to make distinctions immediately as far as what the outer voices are, being the soprano voice and the bass voice, and then make a distinction further as far as what the inner voices are, being the alto and the tenor. These are important because it kind of shows you the superseding order or hierarchy of the voice parts themselves. Moving on from there, he wants to talk about the actual way that chords are formulated in inversions, so what inversion the triad can be in. So inversions are measured from the bass, but for the purposes of the keyboard format of harmony, he talks about them in the sense of playing a triad almost in your left hand. So if the soprano of the chord is the fifth, or in a C major chord, the G, then it's in its first position. He says if the fundamental tone is the C still. If you play it in first inversion now, you would have E, G, C, and now you would have the C on top, which would make it in second position. And now if you played it in a second inversion chord, you would have G, C, E, which means that the third of the chord is on the top, which makes it in third position. So these are the three positions that you need to know, and they're going to be fluent in throughout the rest of the treatise. So you're going to have your root position chord, your first inversion chord, and your second inversion chord that he just calls positions instead of inversions. So then you have to talk about the connection of the voices and also doubling of what's most important. So to move straight into doubling, Tchaikovsky basically tells us that we're only going to be dealing with the doubling of the fundamental tone. So if it's a C flat chord, which is a very strange chord, you would only double the C flat in that chord. The reason for this is that it's basically the most natural tone to double, even though in the future there'll be other tones that we double, but for all intents and purposes at the time being, only the fundamental should be doubled. Moving on to the connections of which voices are to be connected in triads, it should be in the same voice. So for example, if you have a C major chord and it's going to an A minor chord, the two voices that hold the C and the E from the C major chord should maintain the same position in the A minor chord. So why don't I show you an example of how to do the exercises that Tchaikovsky is recommending that we try and attempt. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to start to be drawing the stave. And I'm personally just stickler on staves that are pretty well and parallel with one another, so I use a ruler. And then after I begin to do the staves and the clefs, I then take my Tchaikovsky and I write out whatever the bass line is from the examples. Now in this case it's the very first in common time, which I neglected to put the time signature or the stems to any of the notes. But I write down the entirety of the first example, number 15, I guess 15A would be a good way to put it, of all of the half notes. And this is before the second example, also in common time, but in G major. So once I finish writing out all of the bars, then I will start actually doing the voicings of the chords. So just a caveat again, if you read the Tchaikovsky guide, Tchaikovsky recommends actually writing out in each key the connections of each chord to one another in every single inversion. And if one is to do this, then they will probably end up writing 120 chords just for one key. With 30 keys, you can see that ended up being a lot of chords. So that's more of extemporaneous material, and I think it's something that it would be very beneficial, but it's not something all of us have time for, so it's good to just do a few exercises after the end of each chapter. Now, when I started my voicing, I actually started in the closed voicing, like Tchaikovsky recommends for the beginning of the book. And doing these closed voicings, I start low in a register, so that way there's room to build, which, as you can see as I progress, will happen. Now, the most important thing to note is that I'm keeping the common tones in the same voices, even as the bass continues to move. So you can see here in the first bar, moving from C major to E minor, I'm moving from a root position C major chord to a second inversion E minor chord, keeping the G and the E in what could be considered the soprano and alto. And then moving from the E minor chord to the G major chord, I'm keeping the G in the soprano and the B in the tenor. So you can see as I move on through the chords, I'm doing my best to make sure that the voicings are correct and allowing for some type of sensibility that would be common with the voice leading practices of the era and with the guide itself. So now you have a good idea of how to do the exercises that are in the Tchaikovsky guide. I'll probably do more of them in the future, so that way you can see how they progress as time goes on. But otherwise, that's about it that I have for today, and hopefully I'll be seeing y'all soon. Otherwise, though, as always, everything you need is in the description, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Other than that, peace.